a snare now. Typically have two mics on a snare, top and bottom. I also have some samples down here, which we'll get to a little bit later, but they are all going to their own snare bus. We'll jump right into the top snare mic. I'll mute the snare reverb that's on there, and I've bypassed all the plugins. So this is what this top snare mic sounded like after it was recorded. So it doesn't really sound great. It's kind of dull, kind of muddy. So we needed to add a little bit more high end to this, brighten it up a little bit. I'm starting off with the SSL channel, just like the kick drum, doing a high pass filter at 120, so I'm rolling off everything below 120, and I'm adding a shelf boost at 7.4K by about 5 dB. And this is kind of the same deal that we did with the kick drum. It adds the high-end sizzle. So I'll take this boost out, play it for you, and bring it in and out so you can hear what it sounds like. So a boost up there will really add some life to the snare. I'm also doing a boost at about 4K by 2 dB and another boost at about 2K, boosting by about a dB. We talked about how the low end of the kick drum lives around 60 Hertz. Well, the same thing applies to the snare drum except around 200. So if my snares need a little bit more bottom, I will boost around 200. I'm using a bell curve here, boosting by over 6 dB. So I'll bring this down and show you what it sounds like. I'll bring it in and out. Snares sound really good when they have a bunch of high end on it. At least I like it, but you definitely need some low end in there too. I'm also using the compressor, just like the kick, using a slow attack, fast release, 3-to-1 ratio, and I'm getting about 3 to 6 dBs of gain reduction. So just like the kick, it adds some more punch and evens out the drum. I'll show you this drum with the plug-in bypass versus on. Pretty dramatic difference. It's definitely louder, but just like the kick, I like to add more high end and low end and some compression to make it punch a little bit more. Just like with the kick, I then move to the Pro Q2, and this is where I do kind of my fine tuning. And I like this plugin a lot because you can really zero in on the frequencies you want to affect. So looks like I added some low end at 174 Hertz, so I'll show you this frequency. So it's just more of the low end that I wanted to add. I also took out some mud at 444 Hertz and about 730 Hertz. So I'll show you these real quick so you can hear the mud that I'm taking out. So in between 400 and 800 Hertz, it can get real muddy on a snare. So a lot of times if there's too much ring or too much mud, I go in there and do some surgical EQing. The next plugin I used was this stock Logic distortion plugin, and I've been using this on a lot of my snares recently. Just add some saturation and drive to the snare. It's pretty subtle, but I'll show you what it sounds like off versus on. Hopefully you can hear that. Like I said, it's really subtle, but it beefs up the snare. And not every change we make has to be a crazy change, right? It doesn't have to affect the sound too much. It's about making a lot of little subtle changes for a better overall sound. Next, I added a noise gate, just like the kick. Got the Pro G on here. Release at 100 milliseconds, hold at 83, attacks all the way at 0. And we're just alleviating some of the background noise, just like we did with the kick. So I'll show you what this sounds like off versus on. So just like the kick, not all the background noise is removed, but we're taming it down a little bit. Now we're going to move on to the bottom snare mic. What I use the bottom snare mic for is to get more high end and crack out of the snare drum. What I typically do is I roll off everything up to about 300. So I'm doing a high pass filter to 306, and then I boost a ton on the high end. So I'm putting in a high shelf at 5.3K and boosting by about 10 dB. So I'll just show you with this plugin off versus on. So by itself it wouldn't sound very good, but with the other snare mic, it actually sounds nice. You can hear more of the rattle from the snare. So I'll show you what these two sound like together. So without that bottom snare mic, it really sounds pretty dull. And I don't know if you saw, but I am using the compressor on the SSL for the snare bottom as well. Getting about 6 dB of gain reduction with using the slow attack. And lastly, we're just adding a noise gate like we did with the first snare mic. Got the release at 770 milliseconds, hold at almost 43 milliseconds, attack all the way at 0, and I'll show you with and without. Now for our snare sample, and this is a pretty beefy sample. I didn't do anything to it, no plugins. This is what it sounds like. And now I'll just show you what all three sound together. I'll bring the sample in and out. So it's pretty high up in the mix. I usually don't mix my samples in that loud, but this one sounded really good. This snare sample quiet is the same sample as the top one. My trigger program wasn't reacting to some of the quieter notes Rob played, so I just had to make a new track and lower the threshold for some of those parts. So I'll show you that real quick. I also added a rim shot sample. He does play on the rim for one part of the song, and his actual rim shot didn't sound as good, so I just added a sample over top of it. This is what it sounds like. And I'll just play it in the mix real quick too, so you can hear it in the mix. And we're tangled up in the lies of our story. I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive. Just like the kick, I'm sending all these snares to their own bus. So I have a snare bus here, and looks like I felt like it needed a tad bit more high end, so I did a boost, a high shelf boost at 7K. I'll show you with and without. So it's pretty subtle, but it helps it pop through the mix a little bit more. I also added a good amount of reverb to this snare track. So what I did is I created a send to bus 8. Bus 8's my snare verb. So I'm sending a copy of this track over here to this track and adding some reverb to it. Use the Illustrious Plates reverb, and I'm using just a preset of mine, snare verb I called it. And what I'm doing is after the reverb, I'm adding some EQ and I'm rolling off the top end, so everything above 7K I'm rolling off, and I'll talk about why I do that later. And I'm also adding a boost around 200. I like to do this on my snare reverbs. I like to add a boost to that fundamental bass frequency of the snare drum. So I'll show you what this sounds like. So that's really a big reverb for a snare drum. I usually don't add that much, but I thought it sounded good with this song because the song's kind of spacey. Before I move on, I'll just show you what the kick and snare sound like together. Alright, so the kick and snare sound great, so we're going to move on to toms now. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to download my Ultimate Home Studio Mix Guide. These are my go-to starting points for EQ and compression for all my instruments. I've also included my settings for my drum bus and my master bus. This is going to make your life so much easier when mixing, and if I had this 10 years ago, it would have saved me from a lot of headaches when I was struggling to mix my own music. I've seen a lot of cheat sheets out there from big name guys giving out their tips, but we know that when we're recording at home, the quality of the tracks we start with aren't always going to be as good as if they were recorded in a big studio. But this guide is perfect for someone recording at home and is going to go a long way in helping you create label quality music. Click the link on the screen or in the description to download. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.